what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to give a little bit about my experience using drones and some of the my background. I'm going to talk about very early on about some of the tech that I'm working with and the development projects I'm engaged in. And then I'm going to just define what geoDRONEology is. And I'm going to kind of review the geoscientific applications of drones, go over some of the sensors that are available to us today that we could put to work, and then talk about the benefits and the factors impacting the benefits of using drones and the factors impacting the use of drones. And then I'm going to go into actually four different sort of application areas that I've been involved with. By no means am I actually covering all of that what we can do with drones, but I'm just talking about some of the things that I've been doing with drones, and I figure I can talk mostly about what I know. That's going to be locating legacy oil and gas wells and pipelines. I did a little project in January where I actually participated in a project in January where we located some cars in some lakes and rivers. And then I did a little work where we were testing it on a UXO, surrogate UXO. And then finally, I'm going to kind of end up with kind of a case history of what I've been doing with the Crestone crater and then close out my remarks. I've done probably 40 or plus commercial UAV surveys. I actually have lost count. But I've been collaborating with a number of groups that make instrumentation like geometrics or software. Sequent Geosoft is the software I use for geophysical processing. GeoFX, Geonics, TerraPlus, mobile geophysical technologies, Guideline, Geo, all make instruments that I'm either working with currently or will be soon. I'm actually an adjunct professor, which is at this Colorado School of Mines to actually teach a component of their geophysical summer field camp. And then recently my company has made a relationship with a company out of Houston called Impact AI, and which we're actually starting to apply machine learning and artificial intelligence to some of the drone magnetic and electromagnetic data that we've been acquiring. I got decades of experience doing geophysical work, both on the ground and in the air and in the borehole. And covering a lot of different areas. Resource exploration is my love, but a lot of us had to move into environmental work, and currently I'm actually doing a fair amount of buried infrastructure work. And the drones are really playing into this. My background in geophysics really is where I've tried to keep my focus. This is the MagArrow. It explains this little slide there explains what it is. It's a miniaturized cesium vapor optically pumped magnetometer. It's the picture in the lower right here corner is the current version of it. But I started off with right above it is the prototype. I started off with that. They had to change the shape because it looked too much like a bomb. But basically it samples at a kilohertz, which is pretty rapid. A lot of data come off of it. It's pretty sensitive. It's got a little bit of and it's got a pretty broad range of operating range. And both of these are just how those photos there of that hanging below the drone. That's the way we're currently facilitating the use of it. Is we hang it about 10 to 12 feet below the drone so that the electromagnetic noise that comes off the drone itself is not impacting our measurement. But plus, I'm working with two different EM systems. The one at the bottom there is called an EM61 Lite. It's a deep-looking metal detector, and the one up at in the upper right-hand corner is a a system called the GEM2, and it's a frequency domain system for mapping conductivity in the near surface. As I mentioned early on, we're also looking at a semi-airborne system where we have either a grounded dipole or a large loop on the ground. That'll allow us to see on the order of about 2 kilometers in the subsurface. So right now we're proposing it's a bait in Germany, and we're proposing on a groundwater project we think it's very appropriate for. If we get that, then I'll have that system in the US, and then it's coming, we'll be doing some work here to kind of prove it out a little bit more. And then I'm also looking at a gamma ray spectrometer, planning on having it here at the end of May. We'll be conducting some field trials with it, and hopefully show it in our short course with the School of Mines. And then this is a set of slides. These are data for magnetic data acquired over pipelines. And what we're looking at here is 2 different types of magnetic data. One was more of an academic on the upper left-hand side of the slide, and the right-hand side of the slide that's data that was acquired over a pipeline here in Colorado. I think it was probably 2 years ago, using a drone, the MagArrow actually. And the key is that we're taking these AI algorithms and we're trying to Impact AI is the company that's doing this. They're applying these artificial intelligence algorithms to do a better job of pulling information out of the drone mag data. And anyway, my definition, since I made up the word, I figured I better define what it is. The definition of geoDRONEology is we're using drones to map geology, including detecting and delineating buried objects. Another way of defining it is we're using physics to image the subsurface, the surface, which is the remote sensing part of it, and then the subsurface, which is the geophysics part of it, to inform us about soil, rock, and objects buried within the earth.
Hey, Ron,
I kind of put this together this morning. I did so because I wanted you all to see that this is I would view this as a short list of things that we can use drones for. And the number one is we can just put a camera drone up or a video. Generally, we collect video with it as well as just photos. And we use it to identify surface features of interest. One of the areas, in fact, I just had a phone call from a guy that wanted to use a video to map along a stream bed from a drone to identify areas for he's doing some sort of work on the bed, and he wanted to identify areas. That's pretty straightforward, and it's actually very inexpensive to do. We were using drones to map rock type and structure and alteration. I'm doing that both with photogrammetry, and I'm doing it with other types of infrared sensors. Also magnetometry, and that's really the surface part, the topographic mapping and land surveying, and then subsurface, that's where we're using the magnetometry to map the rock type, structure, and alteration. And then we can detect and delineate geohazards, things like sinkholes and landslides, detect and delineate contamination, either on the surface or in the subsurface. We can detect and delineate unexploded ordnance. Oftentimes we refer to that as UXO. Those are the residue of human beings after conflicts. Or in the case of the U.S., we have a lot of bombing ranges that are now undergoing the use of drones for actually identifying areas that contain UXO. And we can characterize and assess infrastructure. There's a movement on to do that kind of thing. I think of this in terms of geophysics, but it isn't always geophysics. And then we monitor natural and extractive processes, and we detect gaseous emissions. So,
hey Ron,
this is just a short list.
Stop you really
quick? Just a whole bunch of stuff.
Can I stop you really? Can I pause you really quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, your voice is kind of coming in and out a little bit. Are you able to just kind of direct your voice at the computer?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised. I got this um, uh, microphone. I wonder if it's actually working right.
Okay, that last bit sounded better. So
Okay, I brought the microphone a little closer to me. Maybe that'll
that
help.
that does sound a little better. So yes, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I put this together when I first started getting in this slide. It's been through several generations, but it's basically the same thing that I started with 6 or 7 years ago when I first got into looking at what we could do with drones. And it's uh, today we have our sensors are improved, but over they what they were 7 years ago. But 7 years ago, I recognized that we could do color photographs and do color video. We could do near infrared. Very often that's used in the ag business. The shortwave infrared, thermal infrared, shortwave infrared, for those who know about remote sensing, is often used for alteration mapping. Thermal infrared, there's a number of uses for that. Then we have multi and hyperspectral imaging and LiDAR. And then in the geophysics domain, there's a technology. I showed a photo of one earlier of a gamma ray spectrometer. All of these are things we can do that are surface mapping. And then I tend to focus on the geophysics part of it, which is the magnetics, electromagnetics, ground penetrating radar. There's currently research being done for doing seismic from drones. Just a whole lot of applications. We distinguish between the upper part being remote sensing and the bottom part being geophysics. In my mind, it's all either remote sensing or geophysics, and from the drone space, it really doesn't make any difference. On the right-hand side of the slide are all of the things that could be applied to. It's sort of reinforcing that previous slide where I was kind of labeling or listing off the potential applications of it. It just blows your mind a bit that we can do so much with it. Anyway, the benefits of UAV surveys, we're using them to access difficult areas. We're flying what I call ultra low altitude surveys. Those are low and ultra low. We think of that as being below 500 feet AGL, and ultra low is I define as being below 10 meters or so. Generally, it's on the order of 1 meter above the ground surface. That's where our sensor is. The advantage of the drones, one of the benefits, is to have improved spatial data density. We can acquire a lot more data. I'm trying to move my microphone while we're talking here. Because we can be closer to the Earth, we can enhance our signal strength. We can lower our operational costs. We can improve our safety of the field staff that are in the field running these operations. We reduce risk to property damage, facilitates temporal change detection, and quick turnaround of data products. That's just an amazing amount of things that are benefits. The factors that impact UAV surveys, probably the one that is the greatest impact is the weather. And then, of course, site access, size of the survey area. Because we're using small unmanned systems, they have a limited amount of time they can be actually up in the air if they're electric. But these are, and they get longer as that is, the duration of flight gets longer as we move to other sort of propulsion systems. And generally, we have a small payload. It's my drone will carry up to about 5 kilograms. That's pretty good, but it's probably not good enough for some of the payloads we'd like to have. I've limited. Those are the limitations of UAV surveys. We're looking at restrictions. Those are more things like regs and where we're confined by the FAA in the United States and other groups, governmental groups outside of the United States. Generally, we're having to fly UAVs that are below 25 kilograms in size. That's the maximum takeoff weight. That means the UAV plus the payload. Where in the US, the maximum altitude is that we can fly it without getting additional permission is 400 feet above the ground level. We have to maintain visual line of sight, communication or connectivity to the drone. Most of our drones have several miles of radio control ability, but we can't really see that far, but we have to maintain by regulation our line of sight. Nighttime operations were recently allowed, or there's been a change in the regs recently that has allowed that to so that we can actually fly at nighttime operations, and we are restricted from operations over people. That actually has changed a little bit too. Generally, we can only operate one drone per one pilot. And then, of course, the bottom one is the certified unmanned aircraft pilot requirement. Everything above that is you can get a waiver on from the FAA. Most people don't, but as we move forward, what we're looking for, what we can expect to see is that we'll have to have our drones communicate with other aircraft in the airspace, and generally that's being done right now using a remote reference ID. It's a broadcast ID to the drones. In 2023, that'll be the law. And then there's efforts to create an unmanned traffic management system in the United States. Probably 2023 or shortly thereafter, within a few years, we'll have a complete traffic management system for the drones that we're using in the US airspace. Other countries will follow suit, and all of that is meant to really ensure that we're safely operating these aircraft and not endangering the people on the ground or the people in the air. So I'm going to move into actually talking about what's got me started in this. 2015 or so, I began locating on the ground using magnetometry legacy oil and gas wells, and I had located a bunch using ground magnetics. And then I had a project that I got a chance to start working with a prototype version of the MagArrow, and I thought, well, this would be a good target, would be to go and try to locate these oil and gas wells, which in the state of Colorado, if it was permitted, it generally is in the COGCC database. But the locations were just the permit location, and that was within a quarter section, and so that there could be some major change when the driller came out. I mean, the distance from where the U.S. the database has the location to where it actually is, and the drone magnetometry is a great tool for using to find that. This slide pretty much explains why it works, that why magnetometry works. I won't go through all of that. But I've developed essentially two methods that I apply to locating legacy wells or pipelines. There's the scanning method, which is generally used for covering a larger area. It's a typical geophysical survey, flying that generally at about just above tree height. In the west here, we don't have trees, so we're generally flying that about 20 meters above ground surface. And then there's the locating methodology, which is where I have an idea where the well's located, and I'm actually moving, just kind of concentrating on that area, expanding out from where the coordinates are in the database to just identify where it is and effectively map it. And then once I have the magnetic signature of the well, I do some analysis and detect not only to locate it laterally precisely I locate it within about 2 meters. That's our error in my GPS that I use on the ground. But also I estimate the depth of the top of it. So I can usually be within a foot or two of where that top of that well is. This is an example of a scanning method applied to locating scanning an area in West Texas. There's in this case there were two pump jacks on site, and the mag data was you can see here there's a response here that's due to a pipeline. This is a pipeline that's along the road. And the idea was the objective of the project was to scan the area that was in between the road and where these pump jacks were to see if there wasn't a legacy oil and gas well that had not been documented. And there's no anomaly there. There really was no well there. But what you can't really see in these data, there is but I can see in the mag data, that the profile version of the data, is that there is a little bit of a smaller pipeline that we weren't seeing because of the altitude we flew at. But if I was to fly lower and closer to the ground, I could actually have mapped that pipeline as well. This is an example that comes from Colorado, where we had a project to locate 4 legacy oil and gas wells within a quarter section. And within each quarter section, there was a well. The map on the very left is the pre-survey design that I would put together for a survey, and where I'm actually deciding where I'm going to fly it, how tight a spacing I'm going to use. In this case, the lines are the primary flight lines are 10 meters apart. The tie lines are 20 meters apart. The primary flight lines are north-south. Tie lines are east-west. So we had 4 different circumstances here. We took off, and these are 4 different sorties. That a sortie is a mission. We took off from a common point and flew one, and the one in the upper left hand from where we took off is you can see here the mag results are plotted. The black dot is where the well was located in the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission's database, and the magnetic data, the color contours behind that show you what the magnetic data response is. And then basically reds are high and blues are low. And you can see the flight path that was programmed. The pilot basically lifts he programs the flight path that we're going to have the drone fly on. He lifts it manually. He flies it up. It gets to an altitude. He puts it on autonomous flight, and it goes and does its thing and comes back. We download the data, upload the next flight plan, and does it again. We did this project. We were done acquiring the data within 2 hours of showing up on site. And let me go to the next slide. This shows you the results. The green dots are where I located the wells from the magnetic data. In the upper left-hand corner, it was just an open field. There was no indication of any oil and gas activity on the surface. The farmer this probably had been plugged and abandoned in the 90s, and the farmer had tilled the soil and since then had just totally removed all indication of a well being there. In this one here in the upper right-hand corner, there was actually a pipeline flow line that was located close to the well, and still we were able to actually identify where the well was, even though we were also seeing the response of the pipeline. In the lower left-hand corner, there was a pump jack on the site. You can maybe make it out a little bit there. At least I know it's there. But that was there had been a previous well there, and they had obviously they had to locate the well before they put the new well in and put the pump jack on. So that one was pretty well located. We just verified where it was. And then the lower right-hand corner, we located, there were actually 2 well casings. And I interpreted that from there was a couple bumps in the mag profile data. It's not well seen in in this gridded data sets, but I can see it in the mag profile data. I estimated the depth of the top of each one of these wells, and from what the feedback I'm get from the client is I was within a foot of where the actual well was located. So both in terms of depth to the top of it, and as well as the XY location. The thing is, though, that if it's just a single well, it's probably just as good to do a ground mag survey, just as fast to do the data collection, and probably less expensive. But if you're having to locate multiple wells, then drones start to have a real advantage in how quickly they can acquire data. They certainly can do it as good a data as you can acquire on the ground. So the next little case history that I'm going to show you is something we did in January of this year in the city of Nashville. We were I was invited to come down and participate in a location of they had 17 different cars that had been deposited in either the Cumberland River or in the various lakes within the boundaries of the city. The idea behind this is the cars are big, massive ferromagnetic steel objects, and the magnetometer will be able to detect them. We had actually two sites we worked on. One was in the Cumberland River, and the other one was in a lake called Twin Rivers Lake. This is the system we were using. It was a company out of California. They make a drone that's a gas electric drone. It uses a gas motor and it drives a generator. All of the motors themselves, the propellers are electric, but it's not battery operated. That's the key. And it has gas, has such a much higher density of energy storage than a battery, that this is the way to go. We can get up to about 5 hours of flight time out of this drone, whereas the drones that I typically mostly use, you get about 15 or 20 minutes of flight time. So one of the things that I'm moving towards in my business is to be able to use these gas electric drones to actually get a lot more flight time, a lot more data coverage. This one, that's the MagArrow. This right here is actually a broadcast RTK GPS system. So not only do we get much greater flight time, we also get the much more precise navigation of the aircraft, and in recovery of the data point where it's located in space. So this is this happened. Troy flew this before I actually arrived on site, and he gave me this data and said, process it for me, and I did. And he flew 2 flights. You can see the flight paths there. They're the green and the blue dots. And he flew at 2 altitudes. And I think, what do I have here? 44 feet above ground, above the lake, and 22 feet above the lake. And these are the magnetic data that he acquired using those surveys. And you get, I think the 22 is the one that's a little bit less, a little bit more detailed in the data. He, not being a geophysicist, he didn't quite approach it the same way that most geophysicists would, but nevertheless, we were looking for, they actually recovered a car that was in this lake. But what brought us there is that they were looking for a guy who had committed suicide and drove himself into a lake. So that's kind of was the premise of using MAG, is to try to find it. This is in the Cumberland River, and there were a number of cars. The photo of the guys on the side of the river there, they're actually on a boat ramp, and we were lifted and flew the survey from that boat ramp, and that they apparently the story goes is that there was a group of car thieves in the city that would steal a car and then take whatever they wanted from the car, and then they deposit it in the river off the boat ramp. And so this is the mag, what I call, I have a process I call mag heat. And these are the anomalies that came from our little mag survey. Plus there's you'll see here in a second, we did another, Troy ran up and down the side of the river. There's nothing in the river in terms of a car, but there are several anomalies that are probably due to cars or some other thing like as big as a car. And this is what I'm showing here is I'm showing the magnetic response and the interpreted location of the source that caused that response. So those, I believe, are cars that got deposited in the river. So the results of the reconnaissance line detected 5 magnetic sources located within 23 meters of the shoreline. And had we done this again, we would have probably just flown the survey along the shoreline, back and forth, and got more dense data along that. The magnetic data in the central area confirms the location and orientation of steel objects. The steel objects the size of a car on the east side of the river. Also, there are 2 at least there. And that the magnetic source is labeled 10. Let me go back a minute and see what I got here. Let's see here. There, that one there is a little further out and away from the shore. So, but it's still in the data set. So I needed to actually identify it. It may or may not be a car. Anyway, this is a little video of that particular drone flying up a hillside, utilizing the RTK GPS system to maintain its altitude above ground level at a very constant rate. This is a pretty important, a significant development in terms of drones, and it has many implications in terms of drone geophysics and just geoscientific mapping. Oh, there we go again. Sorry, I don't have like a music background on this. That's just kind of a dull. For me, it's actually very, very nice to see that we can actually fly this thing at a couple meters above the ground surface very consistently.
Well, Ron, what I noticed too, those videos that you basically program it to stay a certain distance from the surface, right? And it just constantly monitors it, and it does that.
Right. What it's doing is it's because we have a DEM of the site, it's actually following up the drone itself is on RTK, and it's mapped. It actually has also a radar altimeter on it. But it's maintaining that surface above ground, that flight level above ground surface consistently. And see if we can get that thing to work again. That itself is a big improvement in our data quality, because you'll see here in a second why I'm going to say that, or why I say that. This is huge. Not only is this thing capable of flying several hours at a time on one mission, and our magnetometer will acquire data for several hours on one battery. We now have the ability to go out and fly certain sites. We just put it up and program it, and in 2 or 3 hours it brings back a whole bunch of new data, and then we got to deal with processing it. But that's a good problem to have, actually. So let me go on to the next thing. This is what we did this in January as well, and you can see the drone and the magnetometer, and that photo in the center is a set of surrogate UX, unexploded ordnance. They're just steel objects that give you a response that's similar to what you would get with a piece of unexploded ordnance. And the idea here is that we were going to fly the drone to actually map that stuff. This is my drone and getting prepared for it. And right here, I'm actually using a camera drone to map to video the MagArrow and my M600 as it's moving along, acquiring data as it's flying along. Two things to note here is the movement of the suspended load is actually impacting the aircraft itself. The aircraft is trying to compensate for the movement of the suspended load. That's one of the issues that I've been working on trying to resolve, and how I can have less movement, or have it so that there's less movement in the load and the magnetometer, so that the aircraft is able to travel and pass it over the Earth very smoothly. Because right at this point in time, we have a little bit of noise that's due to the movement of the sensor. That is also the second thing to note here, is that that we're probably flying this thing a little too slow, and that we actually do, when we fly on a geologic mapping, we get pardon me about this. We fly it at a faster speed, and that actually keeps the sensor flying much straighter, and the air pushing against it keeps it a little bit more stable, a lot more stable, in fact. So I'll get beyond this. So instead of the data we acquired on that particular mission didn't really work out the way we were hoping for. So we then took the magnetometer and we walked it on the ground, or this gentleman did, and we collected the the blue profiles there are actually the magnetic data that we acquired. And this is showing that for this particular piece of UXO and that orientation, we got that on the left side. We got a very large response. It's roughly 1,378 nanoteslas, which is huge. The center one, we got about 163. It's the same, similar, not the same piece of Surrogate UXO, but it's similar. But it's on its side. It's horizontal and reduces the response significantly. And then this one on the very right is just a smaller piece of a pipe. And the whole point of this is to demonstrate that the magnetometer that we're using, if you fly it over the ground, pass it over the ground surface at a steady enough pace, and maintaining that distance over the ground surface very precisely, we get excellent quality data out of it. So it's not necessarily the sensors at this point. It's being able to operate the aircraft in a way that allows us to get good quality or reduced noise data. Now onto my actually most favorite area that this is in the San Luis Valley. It's within the confines of the Great Sand Dunes National Park. It's in the very northern part of it. You can see it. I'll show you in a minute. This became, I like going down to this. And, not only is it great to go to this San Luis Valley, but this is a nice sort of intellectual exercise of, it's a conundrum in terms of what's causing the magnetic response. So it's within the northern boundary of the Great Sand Dunes National Park. I should point out here that this background here, that's the Great Sand Dunes. And this right in front is the Crestone crater. And the Crestone crater is about 100 meters across. So it gives you the perspective of scale. This is a photo taken with a drone. There's my truck right there. And this is a parking lot that people will stop and they'll go hiking in the national forest there. I'll move to here. I learned about the time I got invited in 2016 to fly the drone within the Great Sand Dunes, but there's a local business league called UAS Colorado, which had developed a relationship with the National Park Service, and they requested that they go in and fly the drones on some of the sand dunes. they approached me, that is UAS Colorado did, and said, "Would you like to try to get in there and fly your magnetometer?" And I was intrigued, but I didn't think that the sand dunes is where I wanted to fly it. And somewhere along the way, we learned about the School of Mines students, 2011. They did a senior project there where they did some mag over this, what we now call the Crestone crater. And this is the mag data that they had collected that came out of their report for their class. And what was interesting was that there was about 4% magnetite within the surface sands. This on the left-hand side is their, I think those are the idealized survey lines or survey traverses that they were had acquired along. So in 2017, in addition to looking for mapping legacy oil and gas wells, I was looking for a site that I can go do some geologic mapping on, and this became the site. I went down there, and you see our drone. There's the bomb-like looking prototype, the pilot, and that's a National Park Service geologist. And we went down to try to figure out how to best fly this. We covered a bigger area than the School of Mines students did. We actually in the center of it, there's the Crestone crater where I have it. This data here is showing the. Let me move to the next slide. So we flew several missions from one single point here. That's where created a term I call flight operations staging location, or a fossil. That's where we staged. We were actually outside the boundaries of the park. As many of you probably know, the National Park Service kind of frowns on the use of drones inside the park. We did have full permission to do that. We had a scientific permit, scientific study permit, or there's a phrase for that. So anyway, we flew north-south lines. There were, I believe, 20 meters apart, and they're color-coded here according to the mission that we flew. And after we got done, we flew north-south, and then we flew some tie lines. I went out with the ground magnetometer, and I collected a set of data, and that there's less than straight lines in the background there, kind of reddish lines, or my walking around collecting mag data. And the background here on the right, what we see here is the magnetic data with no processing. I've done no leveling. I've done nothing to this. This is the raw data. And then what's inserted in there is the ground magnetic data I acquired. And the contour lines are actually from the drone mag data. So the correlation between the drone and the mag data and the ground mag data is just phenomenally good. It just blew my mind. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized there were some interesting things going on that I couldn't explain. In general, from this data, it's very limited. It's roughly, I think it's about 500, 600 meters by 600 meters. And there, down the center of it is a magnetic low. Couldn't explain why they have magnetic lows. We're seeing a low in the center of the Crestone crater, the berm. Directly with the berm, there's a high. I've not removed any background, so there's actually a trend here due to this big mag anomaly in the southeast quadrant. And then we note in the northeast quadrant that there is a high. And then within that trough, I call it a low magnetization trough, there are several different circular anomalies that are popping out that I could not explain. I didn't know what caused the Crestone crater at the time. The thought was that, or the prevailing hypothesis was that it was due to a meteorite impact. I think we've come up with a different sort of story for it, which I'll explain a little bit. So in 2018, we went back down and flew a much bigger area. We flew a 1 square mile area, increased the flight line spacing a little bit. We ended up flying 25 different flight blocks, and then I stitched all of that together. We had 4 different fossils for flight operation staging locations. It took us about a day and a half to acquire all that data. And then the bottom, the total magnetic intensity map is there. You can see that we have those lows that I identified in the 2017 project are in fact real. And we were able to still see at this flight line spacing the Crestone crater response. And we could also, by removing some of the longer wavelength data, components of the mag data, we were able to start seeing other things happening within this area. And I've thrown some lineaments on there we'll call them magnetic lineaments. They could be due to faults. They could, I don't really know what they would be due to at this point, but let's assume that they're faults. That led to, so that in 2018, we can say that we enlarged the area to do a 1 square mile. It took us longer, but we covered quite a bit of territory then than we did in 2017. We did a large number of flight blocks, which actually slowed down the processing time. And from that point, I learned that it was better for me to reduce the number of flight blocks, or actually fly much longer lines and not have to try to stitch these individual flight blocks together and try to get them all to level up properly. And the magnetic high in the southeast of the crater is much better defined, suggesting that it is due to a different rock type. Since then I've learned that it's actually Cretaceous, and it's been brought up from below. Don't know the mechanism or why it's even there, but at least it's mapped as a different rock type. The magnetic low zone adjacent to the crater suggests a possibility of a graben type structure or a down drop block. The origin of the crater is probably the result. This is our current interpretation. It's probably the result of a movement along a rangefront fault, which caused a sand boil to occur, multiple ones to occur, where coarser grain material, larger chunks of rock were brought to the surface, deposited on the surface, and then over time that magnetite-rich surface sands started to infill it, infill the pore spaces between these larger, coarser grain rock, and thus allowing it to give it actually a continuous magnetic signature, a magnetic high that's directly associated with the berm. That came out of 2018. I went down in 2019 and I tried, the first 2 surveys were done with a prototype, but I wanted to use the production version, which is a much more efficient and much more effective mapping magnetometer. So the first thing I did was fly a quick survey. Took us roughly an hour to fly this survey, high density data. And you get to see that, yeah, we're seeing the Crestone crater response is actually superimposed on a LiDAR base, LiDAR generated DEM. And when we started looking at that, we started seeing there's other similar sort of topographic features that aren't evident when you're on the ground, but as you start moving away and also as you start getting more detailed data, like the LiDAR data, then we're starting to see a lot more potential for, at least in terms of understanding the geology. So we did that, and then we backed up a minute and we flew another survey, roughly 600 meters by 600 meters. So we're replicating what our bigger survey in 2017, and 20-meter line spacing, 100-meter tie line spacing, roughly the same altitude that we're flying the drone and the magnetometer, and we achieved that within 2 hours time. So what we've done, and since we started working with the prototype till 2019, using the production version, we've been able improve our ability to acquire the data, improve our field processes, our data collection processes, or data processing itself, and we're able to generate this information much quicker. And in fact, I do a lot more interpretation in the field nearly real time. Ultimately, the goal that I envision is that we would be able to have the computers actually processing the data while we're acquiring the data. It's a little bit more difficult than saying it, but it's not an unrealistic goal. Then what we did is we backed up. We went down to that parking lot, and we went out to town. We rented a boom lift, and we came back the next day. We put the pilot up in the boom lift. He's now 50 feet above the ground level, and we flew a larger area, roughly 2.7 square miles. He's oriented in the center right here. We flew it from one location, as opposed to having to move to different fossils. We were able to keep the pilot stationary. We put him up in the air 50 feet. He was able to maintain visual line of sight with that drone while it was acquiring data. And these are more than a mile long flight lines here, actually probably closer to 2. But we were able to actually improve our efficiency. So over the course of 2 days, we were able to acquire this data in a much bigger area. And you can see that we now are beginning to see a much different picture of the geology, be able to show that we do have these magnetic lows, and we do have this big high here, and we're looking at a trough region that's coming off that's along the range front. We're starting to see a lot more information in the data, but the part of what I'm trying to also demonstrate here is that we're also able to very effectively scale our surveys. So in 2011, this is the green line rectangle shows the extent of what the School of Mines students collected. 2017 is the red line is what we collected in 2017. The other green line is 2018's extent, and in the background you can start seeing these other circular features. This is the DEM data from the LiDAR. And then in 2019, we actually started seeing a much bigger survey. We're able to complete that. They were done for different geological mapping reasons, from detail to something that's much coarser. Some of you may know that there is a potential for oil and gas in the San Luis Valley, and I'm not sure that this is an area for it, but it's beginning to, at least from my hypothesis here, or my thesis, is that we're starting to be able to collect more detailed data and do it more rapidly than we can sort of more conventional means. So my closing remark is that we are entering the era of drone geoscience. This is just what I've shown you now is just a little snippet of what is possible. Today, we can perform photogrammetry and LiDAR surveys with drones. We do near infrared for vegetation stress, thermal infrared for a variety of other problems. And then from the geophysics point of view, we can do drone magnetometry at low and ultra low altitudes, that we can fly this thing very close to the ground surface, or we can fly it at 100 feet or several hundred feet above the ground surface. We can cover bigger areas now than with the advent of this longer duration flight drones. In the coming months, what I expect to be doable is we're going to be doing EM conductivity mapping. In fact, I have a plan to go back down to the Crestone crater, use the EM system that I have, the GEM2, and actually map the conductivity variations. And because of the nature of the sensor, I can also map the magnetic susceptibility variations in the near surface sands and material. I plan to do that and see if I can't identify or correlate changes in susceptibility with some of the anomalies that I'm collecting with the drone mag data. And then we have this deep looking metal detector, which is very good often used for doing unexploded ordnance. And then I'm hoping to go, actually hope, more than hope it, in the couple months ahead, once I get the gamma ray here, I'm going to be going out and mapping outcrops with the gamma ray spectrometry and developing the understanding of how to actually apply these drone sensors, this gamma ray sensor to the drone and develop the technology, or at least the techniques to get good data off of it. Now, I apologize for kind of rushing through this. I hope that you were able to get something out of it. I thank you very much for your attention. With the exception of, I want to point out, with the exception of one photo in this, all of the imagery that you saw are things that I either took in the field on projects been working on. This particular set of photos was done on a gold mine in Southern California.